Welcome to Quaestionare in English. I am Sam Stone, Professor of Law at the Universidad de las Americas Puebla, and I am joined today by Toño Montes, a student in the degree of International Relations and Political Science, and Valeria Cotulenc, an alumna of that program at our university. And welcome back, guys, and welcome to all of you who are watching us today. We will be discussing Joe Biden's first 100 days, that period that finalized over the last couple of days, and which has been talked about extensively in the media. We're going to try to go into a little bit of depth of what's happened, what he's proposing next, right, and what some of the challenges might be to him achieving those very ambitious goals that have led to him being compared already to domestically successful presidents like Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt over the last few weeks. So let's begin with a little bit of what happened here, right? Maybe Valeria, we can start with you. What's really been achieved over the last 100 days? And I'm going to ask both of you this question, but let's start, Valeria, with you, and then we'll sort of move on and be able to cover as much of this as we can.
So I feel like from an outsider's perception, a lot has been accomplished in these days. I mean, he has signed a lot of bills, he has signed a lot of executive actions, he has reversed some things. But when I was looking at the statistics regarding what he's actually done, it turns out that out of his campaign promises, he's only done 26 so far, which is an impressive number for the first 100 days. But that also means that at the rate that he's going this fast, then he will have no option but to do the others. And the reason that he hasn't done the others is because it's really hard to do them. Either because Congress, funding, his plans have been out for like trillions of dollars, which is crazy in this economy. So I think that he has done a lot. Like out of climate, he has kept 4 of his promises, and economy, he has done 4, also government 3. He has done nothing on gun control, which is one of the biggest issues that he will have throughout his presidency. He has done 5 out of 8 in health, 1 in housing, 7 in immigration, 2 in inequality. That's also a huge issue. And none in national security. He has yet to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, and a lot of this is happening through executive action, right? I mean, if we look at this, there have been some bills that have passed, right? I think the number is up to sort of substantive bills up to 14 or 15, and some of those have been bipartisan. But the big ticket item, right, has been completely a Democratic project. It was passed along party lines. I'm talking, of course, about the COVID bill. So, Toño, tell us a little bit more. What's going on, or rather, what happened with the COVID bill, and what are some of the other laws that have been approved by Congress, right? I'm not talking about executive actions, but some of the other actual legislative achievements that have been attained in these first 100 days.
Thank you, Doctor. Such a pleasure to be once again here with you and with Valeria discussing this important situation. And again, I want to remark that he had a huge challenge when he joined the presidency. President Trump was heavily criticized by the way he managed the pandemic. The United States at some point was having around 3,000 to 4,000 deaths related to COVID-19 per day. So it was a terrible number, similar numbers that we are seeing in India today. They're having a tough situation regarding COVID. But sticking to the scenario that Joe Biden was facing, he was facing an economic crisis, a health crisis, a social crisis regarding racial justice and systematic racism against the African American, and now we are seeing that Asian Americans as well are being heavily discriminated, again, by a speech that was fed by a conspiracy that the Chinese actually invented the coronavirus. We can remember that President Trump referred as the Kung flu or as the Chinese virus, as a virus created by China. And we have seen lots of acts of discrimination and racism against Asian Americans. So those were the problems that President Biden had to deal with. And I think the health crisis apparently, I think is going great in the United States. They're managing to lower the numbers at less than 500 deaths per day, considering that the United States has around 320 million inhabitants. I don't know quite the exact number, but it's around that number. The vaccination process is doing, I think, just fine. One of the largest amounts of vaccine administered in the world. The numbers of the president expect by the 4th of July to have a way in which we can come back to what used to be the normality for us. That challenge that he proposed to achieve 100 million doses in the first 100 days, he overpassed that goal that his administration had, and it was a pretty quick response, a very efficient response against the, we can say, inefficient start of the vaccination process by President Trump. As Valeria said, he also addressed quickly situations that he promised in his campaign by signing executive orders. Again, I think in his first 2 or 3 days, he signed around 17 executive orders.
Yeah, the number's up to 41 now.
Up to 41 now, but I remember the number in the first 2 days that was around 17. It was a record. Like, no president had signed 17 executive orders in his first 2 days. He did that. As you said, Dr. Stone, he has been compared to a president that had been pretty interested or pretty focused on domestic issues rather than seeing a broad scenario of the United States to the world. But again, he has also done that because he rejoined Paris Agreement. He reaffirmed the role of the United States as a leader in the international and the multilateral forums. He's really concerned about situations regarding the emissions of CO2. He led the summit on climate change that happened last week and that we commented in the last program. So I think overall, these 100 days of the administration has been a hard work 100 days in which we have seen results. There are still some huge challenges. First, regarding migration, and I think the one that is in the oven and that is preparing some crucial laws regarding gun control, because I think every shooting that happens is one other drop that is about to spill the glass of the patience of the Americans regarding this situation. So that's what I could resume about these 100 days of Biden administration.
Yeah, so they definitely came in prepared, right? They definitely knew what they wanted to do in the first 100 days in terms of executive orders, in terms of the legislation they were going to propose. And, as we've seen in other countries as well, while the COVID crisis, right, initially had this rally around the flag effect where people just sort of all political stripes sort of supported their government in this sort of nationalist, in a positive sense, sort of a nationalist, we're going to support our country getting out of this. Many people have turned on their governments when those governments have been unable to handle the COVID crisis. And so I think they knew very well that this was going to be the singular issue that voters were going to be voting on, at least in the midterms next year, probably in 2024 as well. This is going to be perhaps the most important issue, and they've responded to that very, very strongly. Right? There have been other bills that have gone through, things as some of which are very mundane, such as adding sesame the food, right, to the list of major allergens, right, that are required on food labeling. But more importantly, right, for example, anti-Asian hate legislation, right? There's a bipartisan bill that was approved to create a new position in the Department of Justice and to do other things in order to try to curb anti-Asian hate. That ended up passing in a bipartisan way, even though Republicans initially opposed the law. So there have been some other things as well. And as you guys have mentioned, right, through executive orders, he has really tried to do many of the things he promised on the campaign trail and to revert many of President Trump's most controversial and most disliked executive orders, such as the Muslim travel ban, such as the construction of the border wall. Right, he just announced yesterday that he's going to be he's rescinding all of those contracts to build the border wall. And so, a lot has been done, and they've been able to keep, or at least to be on track to fulfill their major campaign promises. Now, in Biden's speech a few days ago, right? This is sort of a joint address to Congress. It's kind of what the new president gets instead of a State of the Union when there's a change in president, because the former president already did States of the Unions, and then this guy, the new person, gets to sort of address Congress as well. This is a very different setting, right? Usually it's the chamber of the House of Representatives, which is where the speech takes place, is usually packed. It's usually, right, full to the brim. The first lady brings along some special guests, right, to be there and sort of highlight different policy issues. We know Trump was much more dramatic about the different types of people he would have there and what he did during the speech. But this was totally different, right? This was 200 people in the House chamber, socially distanced, masked, right? It was a very different sort of environment from a sort of practical perspective. But Biden's speech was perhaps one of the most effective of his career. So what is Biden proposing going forward, right? We know there's all this infrastructure proposal. There's the proposal about, the families bill to try to support working families. But what else are we looking at, and what can we say about those two proposals going forward? And we'll talk about how feasible it is for those proposals to actually get passed. But for now, right, just at first, what is he proposing going forward? We've done 100 days. What is he going to do with the next 3 years and 9 months or so of his presidency? Maybe, Valeria, we can start with you.
Yeah, I loved how the New York Times actually put it, where they basically said that he wants to create this blue-collar blueprint to build America. He unveiled this huge infrastructure plan that's meant to continue helping boosting the economy and then help it recover by recovering jobs, creating jobs and everything. So I think that will be the second focus of his administration, mainly, as he said it, after dealing with the COVID pandemic. It will just be reactivating the US's economy and then creating infrastructure and plans that help it that help it go farther.
I agree with Valeria. I think the main goal of this administration in the short term, we don't know what he's going to do in the last 2 or 1 year of the administration. But it seems in the short term that the main focus point will be the economic recovery, because again, the United States was heavily hit by the COVID-19 economic cost crisis. And he has done already such important actions. He passed, he got Congress to pass an economic rescue bill with $1.9 trillion. And this was historic, because no president had invested that much into the economy in one package, in one economic package. I think combined, probably there has been other presidents that have invested more, but in one action, this is the most. Yes, also it was really criticized by the Republicans, but it was the most important economic package that was passed regarding the situation that COVID-19 caused on the economy, because lots of people lost their jobs, lots of people lost their businesses, and they needed to reactivate the economy. And sticking this point into how this relates to Mexico, let's remember that 80% of Mexico's trade is going to the United States. So if United States economy is healthy, our economy is going to be healthy too at some point.
Yeah, and there's also the remittances.
Yes, the remittances. Again, the remittances are the money that Mexicans in the United States send to Mexico. And our President López Obrador praises a lot these remittances. He loves them. But the thing is that it's a good sign for all the Americas continent economy to see the United States economy do well. So I think the President Biden understands that having a strong economic recovery is key. And I think the policies are being focused around that point. There has been other points, such as climate change, that he mentioned also in his address to Congress, that by 2030, they want to reduce 50% the amount of CO2 that is being expelled by the United States, and by 2050 reach a carbon neutral economy. That this means that there will be no emissions of CO2, which seems crazy, seeing the world we live in. there's electric cars, but everyone still uses fuel for lots of things. We consume a lot, we waste a lot. But again, it's not crazy to be optimistic that in 2050 we can reach that goal. And also, just to finish up this section, he mentioned a critical situation regarding migration. So there's a situation in the southern border that we have talked about, but probably Dr. Stone could elaborate a little bit more on that, that he is encouraging the Senate to pass a bill regarding migration that probably will be the most important one in ages.
Yeah, well, as we said before, right, there hasn't been a comprehensive immigration bill really since the 1980s, which is kind of, crazy at this point. That's 2 generations ago. Before it was from before I was born. So just to give it a little bit of context. But before I get to that, before we get to a little bit about what's going to coming next, right? The COVID bill is extremely popular, depending on which polls you look at. We know polls can be wrong, right? But they give you a general sense of where things are. And depending on what poll you look at, the COVID bill overall has somewhere between like 58% support, and some polls it goes up into the 70s, right? With how polarized the country is today politically, this is an extremely popular bill, right? If you look at specific provisions inside the bill, it's even more popular, right? Those specific provisions are more popular than the bill as a whole, right? Which kind of is also a partisan question. If you ask people in the abstract, do you support a bill that provides this and this support? They'll say yes, rather than if you say, oh, do you support Biden's bill, right? Same thing with the infrastructure proposals and with family proposals. Basically, they have very consciously, and we know this from media reports and so on, the administration has very, very consciously picked extremely popular proposals, right? Proposals that are really bipartisan, at least in terms of the support that they receive from people across the country, right? Infrastructure, we're not just talking here about what Republicans are now calling sort of traditional infrastructure, right? We're not just talking bridges and roads and ports and airports and so on, which is an important part of it, but they're also including in this proposal, which might get broken up into various pieces, but they're also proposing, for example, a great expansion of the broad access to broadband internet, especially in more rural parts of the country. Rural parts that tend to be very poor and that often, at least in the Midwest and in the North, are white, right? Are inhabited by white people. Rural areas in the South tend to be more Black and Latino, but in the North, they tend to be white. So the bottom line is there's an expansive set of policies that are being proposed in these 2 bills. They're not just sort of old school physical infrastructure. They're not just handouts to people. There is a lot here, including a lot of money that would go towards building a 21st century economy that is responsive to climate change. So even though this isn't called a climate bill, really the infrastructure bill has a lot of climate components, we could say, in it. So this is very purposeful. This is what the administration wants to do next, right? It's sort of its 2 big items. It wants to focus on these 2 bills that together cost about $4 trillion. And they want to pay for them by doing 2 things. One is increasing the corporate tax rate. It was lowered from 35% a few years ago, all the way down to 21% during the Trump administration, and they want to raise it again to 28%. And also by increasing taxes on those individuals making over $400,000 a year. So not having $400,000 in wealth, but actual income of $400,000 or more a year. That's about the 1%. And on couples making over about $560,000 a year. These proposals are wildly popular in the United States, right? I mean, this is what Republicans in Congress are seen to be missing. Americans like the idea of taxing the rich. They especially like the idea of taxing rich individuals more than rich corporations, which is interesting. But people support this. So having said all of that, what do we think are the chances that these bills actually get through Congress, right? You'd think, because they're so popular, they'd have a lot of support. But what are we seeing from Republicans, especially in the House, right? In the Senate, Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in general in Congress, are they working with President Biden at all to try to get these things through? Or are they actually trying to negotiate? What are we really seeing here? And then what about Democrats, right? We've mentioned Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia on this program before, right? He's sort of the consummate moderate Democrat, I'm sorry. Where are they positioned on these bills? Is Biden going to get them through? Is anything going to end up being bipartisan the way he talked about during the campaign trail? What can we say about this? And if you want, Toño, we'll start with you this time, and then we'll move over to Valeria.
Yes. So basically, the Republicans, well, we have to first contextualize that in the 2020 elections, the Democrats lost a little bit of seats in the House, because in the 2018 elections, they overturned the House that was controlled by the Republicans. In this 2020 election, it was natural that they were going to lose a little bit, some seats, but they end up having the majority in the House, so they can pass bills quite easily. Again, and they have the support of some moderate Republicans, we can say. But in the Senate, the situation is different, because we have a 50-50 situation, with around 4 to 5 senators that can switch positions. Into the Republican side, we're seeing Senator Susan Collins from Maine and Senator Mitt Romney from Utah switching positions, or also voting with the Democratic side. And into the Democrat side, we're seeing Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona, leaning sometimes towards the Republican point of view. So they're considered the most conservative, or the most right-sided Democrats, we can say. And this situation has really put a lot of uncertainty on how does the actual outcome of the votes is going to be, because we're seeing a strong position. Again, the Republicans in the Senate are still led by Mitch McConnell, which is pretty strong with some of his views, and the other senators seems to stick with the position that Mitch McConnell has proposed, and they don't seem to really like lots of the proposals, lots of the bills that President Biden is proposing, and they're making the process harder than it should be. Again, the problem is not very much the House of Representatives, but the Senate. The Senate is where the bills can get stuck, and there's not much room for negotiation in the way that we're seeing the state of affairs. I think it would be pretty hard to get 60 or 65 senators to vote in the same sense, considering that there are still around 48 to 47 senators, Republican senators, that are not willing to cooperate at all with the Biden administration, structural bills or structural projects.
Valeria, what can we say? Is there anything that Republicans are doing to maybe try to work with Biden, or is this just kind of, or as they would say, is Biden doing anything to try to work with them? Or is this sort of just going to be a completely partisan year?
So basically, they united in going to Biden with, like, we'll support you, but it has to be cheaper. So I think currently they want the bill to go from $800 billion to $600 billion, which all in all makes a huge difference in investments. And then there's also the topic that they would say, we will support you with these parts of the plan, but not with these ones. And the ones that they do not want to show their support is particularly the infrastructure spending that would be offset by higher corporate taxes, because as we know, most Republicans oppose taxes. And about what you were saying earlier today regarding polls, I found it very interesting because I was reading before this episode, and there was this page called factcheck.org, where they basically fact check Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, I hope I said his last name right, where he cited this poll that was shown to be a partisan poll. So how can you trust a partisan poll? Because then when they did it the way that it was meant to be, like an independent poll, like they still had high numbers of like bipartisan support. Like there were still some Republicans that supported this bill, but the number went from 57% of Republicans supporting it to 29%. So I think all in all, it continues to be politics, and it continues to be optics in politics. It's how you show it. Because if people believe that most people will support it, then legislators will take action in it. But again, polls can be manipulated. It's not that they're manipulating the information, it's just that they're asking the questions in a different way based on who they support on or what their interests are in the outcome of a bill.
Yeah, right. There are a lot of ways that you can ask questions, and how we ask the questions in polling definitely makes a difference in what the answers are. But consistently, right across the board, in independent polling and partisan polling, right, there is support. Getting 30% of support from the other party today is a big deal, right? They get a lot of support for most of these proposals from independents. So there is sort of consensus, and you'd think, right? You'd think that would lead legislators of whichever party to kind of come around, right, at least on some of these issues, and vote in favor of them. And yet that's not quite what we're seeing. So yeah, right, Republicans are sort of positioning themselves on these economic questions in two ways. One, they're saying, well, we want a bill that's much smaller, right? Instead of $2.4 trillion for infrastructure, we'll give you 600 to 800 billion, right? Which is still a lot of money, but obviously it's a huge difference in terms of, compared to what President Biden is proposing. And the other option, right, is to break up the bill. And that's where it seems like some Democrats are willing to go, is say, look, we'll divide the bill, we'll pass the parts that you want to support in a bipartisan fashion, and then we'll use the reconciliation process to pass the rest of it only with Democratic votes. And I've just mentioned something we haven't really mentioned that much before, which is reconciliation. And I want to spend just a second talking about the filibuster, which is a procedural maneuver in the Senate, and how Democrats got around the filibuster with the COVID relief bill, and how they might continue to use the reconciliation process, is what we call it, when you try to get around the filibuster going forward, right, with these bills. So what happens, right, in the Senate is not a simply majoritarian body. So simply having a majority, small majority or a large majority, right? Just like Democrats have now with a small majority, that doesn't mean that your bills are automatically going to get through. Why? Because there is a procedural maneuver in the Senate called the filibuster, and the filibuster allows any one senator to block the advancement of a bill unless you have 60 senators that vote in favor of unblocking. So let's say I'm just one senator, and I say, I don't like this bill, I am placing a filibuster on this. I'm placing a hold on it. I'm not going to let it continue. The only way for that bill to continue through the Senate is if 60 of my colleagues, so not 51, right, but 60 of my colleagues come together and say, actually, we want to continue with this, sorry. Yeah. Now, what happens today? That means that you need 10 Republicans to vote with all of the Democrats to end a filibuster. Now, some of you might think, well, isn't this filibuster, doesn't that require a senator to stand up there and speak like endlessly to block something? And you would be right if this was like 30 years ago. There was a period in history when that was required, when people did have to actually stand up on stage and keep talking continuously, right? And you could switch off between people, but you had to basically keep talking. In the 1960s, the racist Old South Democrats and Republicans blocked civil rights legislation many times using this filibuster, and that's what they did. They spoke. In one instance, they spoke nonstop for 3 weeks. Yeah, so there was somebody on the floor of the Senate speaking 24 hours a day for weeks. Yeah, but today that's not how it works. Today anybody can just say, I'm filibustering, and then unless the other side can come up with 60 votes, the legislation is blocked, right? So there are two ways, right, to end a filibuster. One is to get those 60 votes. The other way is to simply not allow filibusters. And you can do that sometimes in what we call the reconciliation process. This is a process that allows the majority party to pass bills with only 50 votes, or 51, right, with a simple majority, as long as it is a bill that has all of its provisions relating to the budget. And that is decided by a nonpartisan individual who is the parliamentarian in Congress. And they decide whether something is actually budget related or not. It's not the parties themselves. That's why, for example, a $15 minimum wage was removed from the last bill, because the parliamentarian said, hey, that's not actually a budget provision, and so on. So Democrats have two options. They can either try to get 10 Republicans, 10, not just 2 or 3 or 4, right, but 10 Republicans on board with their bills to get them through, or they can use reconciliation. Now, reconciliations can only be used twice, really once in every budget year. So Democrats used the 2021 reconciliation measure to pass the COVID bill. They could use the 2022 measure this year to pass one more bill. There's now a question in front of the parliamentarian about whether they can amend those reconciliation bills to do more. But the bottom line is, issues like gun laws, issues like immigration, issues like statehood for Washington, D.C., issues like voting rights. None of that is considered to be budgetary, which means none of it can be done through reconciliation, which means all of it requires 10 Republican votes to pass the Senate. So you need 60 votes in favor to break the filibuster. So whatever Biden's going to be doing in the next few years, right? Like you guys were saying at the beginning, he's moved so quickly through some of the early promises. He's done so much on COVID, on climate change through executive actions and so on, that what's left is often going to be blocked by Republican filibusters. And so how we get around that is going to be a big issue in the next few weeks and months and years, right? Whether Democrats are able to get 10 Republicans on board to break the filibuster. So with that said, right, where do we see things going? I mean, is there a chance that something can be done on immigration? Is there anyone on the Republican side who's willing, maybe not to give Democrats what they want, but willing to say, okay, let's come up with something that's much more limited. Let's come up with something, right, on immigration, on gun laws. Is there any flexibility there? Or are we basically saying that because of the filibuster, the rest of the Democratic agenda is dead? Valeria, go ahead. No, Valeria, go ahead.
I don't think it's dead. At the end of the day, this is politics and everyone plays to this politics. So while it may seem that it's dead right now, there's always compromises. There's always the option of saying, well, if you go lower on the infrastructure bill, then we will vote on your immigration bill. It's politics and it happens every day. It doesn't always have to happen like at the biggest levels. It's not necessarily going to be Joe Biden talking with senators. It's going to be senators' aides talking and discussing, and that's how it happens. And it's also important to know that there's not even consensus within the Republican Party, especially with the America Safe Jobs plan. Mitt Romney says this, Senator Capito says this. They just know that they oppose it. They don't know why they oppose it. They just know that they do. So I think that way it's just easier to negotiate, because it's like, okay, you oppose it, and then you talk personally to each person and then get why they're opposing it, and it's easier to get the votes.
I agree with Valeria. At the end of the day, that the Republican bench have to make 74 million voters that gave Donald Trump his confidence in 2020 happy. So if we see passing a law regarding migration that benefits the 11 million residents that do not have any legal papers or any legal status in the United States, granting citizenship after 8 years of a long process that will presumably solve at some point part of the migration crisis, because we have talked lots about this, that is not an issue that we can solve by tomorrow, by the next week, or probably by the next presidency. But again, it's an issue that has to be dealt with calm and with a plan that considers long-term actions. So I think this situation and this bill proposed that is now on the Senate's hands, it's a possible way out, or is a possible solution to this migration situation in the United States. I see difficult that more than 2 or 3 Republican senators vote in favor of this law. If we see the southern border states of the United States, right, for example, California, both senators are Democratic. New Mexico, both senators are Democratic. Arizona, both senators are Democratic. The only state that has the 2 senators being Republican is Texas. So I don't know if this is going to be the trend, but it seems that these southern border states are leaning more blue than red. I don't know when is the next senatorial election for Texas. I know that Ted Cruz just got re-elected like 2 or 3 years ago when he competed against Beto O'Rourke. Next year. But let's remember, Ted Cruz almost lost to Beto O'Rourke. It was pretty tight. It was a pretty close election. And perhaps at some point we could see all the southern border states leaning towards blue. This could change dramatically the situation, because, again, the voice that justifies blocking this law and to not passing it is a Texas state or the Texas senators referring as a situation that they have to deal with, because again, it's a border, is where the migrants concentrate when they would try to pass to the United States. So I cannot predict the future, but I can say that probably in a few years, this situation will change and probably we will see a major reform regarding migration.
All right, well, we're running out of time, but Valeria, any final comments, any final commentary on these 100 days and where things are going from here?
I think it's important to say that he accomplished a lot, whether it was by executive action or by bipartisan efforts, but that doesn't mean that he's off the hook. He still has a lot to accomplish, and what he has yet to accomplish will be the hardest things to accomplish. So while it's impressive what he did, there's still a lot that he has to do.
Yeah, agree. I think that's going to be the big message going forward. They'll be able to get a few more things like the infrastructure package through via reconciliation. Maybe they'll break it up. Chances are, right, that they will get some big ticket items through going forward. But then it gets harder, right? It gets much harder. How do you pass immigration legislation? How do you pass gun control? How do you get DC statehood or Puerto Rico statehood, right? Issues that Democrats want, but that are going to be difficult. These comparisons, we started talking about how Biden has been now compared with Lyndon Johnson and FDR. But what I think people forget is that FDR and LBJ both had pretty substantial majorities in Congress. They had working majorities in Congress, right? Right now, Democrats have a 3-seat advantage in the House because of some vacancies and an even split in the Senate. And so being able to achieve the great, if Biden had 55 Democrats in the Senate and had a 30-seat majority in the House, I think we'd be talking about a very different situation. But under the current split, it's going to be tough, just like you said. So with that, I think we will call it a wrap. We'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for being here today. Again, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And thanks to all of you who are watching us and who have tuned in to watch us week in and week out as we develop this program. We hope it's interesting. We hope you like getting a perspective from south of the Rio Grande about what is going on in the bilateral relationship, what is going on in U.S. politics. And we're going to try to keep doing that for you every week. So hopefully you'll continue to join us on Mondays at 4 p.m. Thank you very much.